We're good to go. And
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I will call to order this August 17th, 2021 meeting of the Lawrence County Retirement Board. Vanessa, please call the roll.
Acting Controller Pressipine,
Here.
Treasurer Tom,
Present.
Commissioner Spielvogel,
Here.
Commissioner Vogler,
Here.
Commissioner Boyd.
Here. We have quorum. Would all please rise for the pledge of allegiance, followed by a brief moment of silence. Dave, would you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And all please remain standing for a brief moment of silence. Thank you. I will note that we are being live streamed, it's being broadcast through our YouTube channel for public consumption. If any member of the public wishes to make comment on issues related to the Lawrence County Retirement Board, I ask they submit that comment to mboyd@lawrencecountypa.gov. That's mboyd@lawrencecountypa.gov. Please include the subject line retirement board comment so that I know specifically it's a comment related to the actions taken, action considered, or actions potentially to be taken by the Lawrence County Retirement Board. Public comments, any member of the public wishing to make comments? I am shocked.
Settle down.
Minutes, we have approval of the minutes from May 25, 2021, which was the last meeting of the Lawrence County Retirement Board. I'll give my colleagues a minute to check those over and take a motion to approve or make any necessary changes.
I see a correction we might need to make.
What do you got?
It states at the first paragraph, it says Deputy Controller Dave Gettings. So it's, and I can't recall, were you here for that
I
meeting,
believe I
David? So
was,
perhaps it should say Mr. Prestipine.
Gotcha. We'll make that change before the motion's made, so that we don't have to worry about the procedural amendment process once the motion's actually on the floor. Any additional amendments? Seeing none, again, I'll take a motion whenever anybody's ready.
So moved.
Is there a second?
We'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, question on the motion, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign, motion carries. And I will turn it over to, and we're sort of exploring a new process here. We're formalizing the retirement board process with a more standardized agenda and more standardized minutes and that sort of thing. In the future, when we put this together, Vanessa, maybe we should add a section that says, so what's the official title of Marquette? Is it my retirement board manager?
Investment consultant.
Maybe we should put a section in there just to say investment consultant report, just so it's officially. Thank you. And on that, we'll turn it over to the investment consultant for the report.
All right.
Sarah.
Sarah, good morning.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. I do have some handouts and we'll go through those. One is an update, July updates. We'll look at performance. And then the other is, we've talked about the global and doing some asset allocation changes. We do have an IPS, so we'll talk about that and work through that. But let's go through the first quarter. If you go to Exhibit 1, you can just see a little bit about a Marquette, just an update. We're celebrating our 35th year in business this year, and we've added a lot of new employees. We're about 120, so we've added about 18 already this year. And Westchester, we've actually started to grow in Westchester. You're going to see some new faces on emails and things like that. We've added 2 performance analysts and also 2 client analysts. And so we've really been growing with Pennsylvania, and we just became the consultant for PMRS as well. So we're starting to do that. New county, we have Somerset County now under advisement. So just kind of really continuing to grow that presence in Pennsylvania. We also have our 2021 investment symposium, which is slated to be in Chicago, but we're going to probably do it live. So I will make sure you have the invite. You can always go in, and then it'll be placed on our YouTube channel as well. So let's turn and look at the market. That's on tab 2. And some of the themes in the second quarter, we'll, and you can see this, you'll see it by your return. Global growth continues, though not uniform across the world. We'll discuss that because international did not do as well in the second quarter. We'll talk a little bit about inflation. We're starting to see that have a little bit of an uptick. We also looked at, we believe that volatility for the second quarter was muted, meaning that we didn't see as volatile up and down in the second quarter. Earning growth, I expect to be strong. And then we saw rates fall a little bit in the second quarter. So we look at the first page and we look at the real GDP. And if you look at that graph below, you can see in the second quarter 2020, that year, it was a dip. Obviously, that was a quarter of the pandemic when it really started to hit. And then you can see it jumped up in third quarter. Now, interestingly enough, we find that it's gonna look pretty good. And then we're going into 2022, and we expect actually that to taper off a little bit. And the reason for that, it's explained below. Look at that graph, and that's a fiscal contribution to GDP growth. So what that means is that's your stimulus package as well in there and stimulating the economy. We know that those packages are gonna go away unless we see, a really pandemic of a shutdown, which we're not expecting. So you can see fourth quarter, it bounced in, 2020. And then we start to see, we think we're gonna see it taper off. So that means it's not gonna be contributing anymore to the GDP. According to Morgan Stanley, consumers are sitting on more than $2 trillion in excess savings, which is very different a couple years ago. We talked a lot about, the Americans, how they don't save as much. And a lot of that saving on the $2 trillion is because of the stimulus packages, last year, and then they weren't able to spend it. Now this year is a total different story. You can't book an airline, everything's packed and everything, so you're gonna start seeing that. But it means that's good, it's starting to come back into the economy. When we look at inflation, we talk about inflation, and currently the 5-year break-even inflation remains higher than the 10-year break-even inflation. So what we're going to do is which continues to find that inflation over the next 5 years will be higher than inflation in the latter half of next decade. So we are going to probably see a rise in inflation. We know when inflation goes up, we're going to see, interest rates go up on there. If you look at flexible CPI and sticky CPI, so flexible is actually, when they look at inflation, they do it in 2 different ways. Flexible is a weighted basket of items that change in price frequently, and then sticky are things that kind of basically stay, they change their price slowly. So that could be gas, would be flexible, we can see the ups and downs in that, food, and then we look at like long-term, housing theoretically is not supposed to be this volatile as we see this housing market. Cars aren't going to go from 20,000 to 30,000. They may go from 20,000 to 22,000. So that's the difference. And we're seeing a lot of, up and down in volatility. We've seen it spiked in the flexible. So we've seen a big raise in consumer gross products. We're going to see that start going up. Now, when you look at below, you're going to see the short-term interest rates. This is interesting. The Fed came out and said, we're not going to touch rates. We know that they're not going to do anything till next year. They're probably going to start doing it in 23. When you look below, you can see what actually they did in the short-term interest rates. Now, look where the Fed's June prediction, they said they would do a little tick. Futures market saying, no, we're going to see it go up a little bit more. So meaning that the market is kind of standing back and saying, well, yes, you said you're going to keep it this way, but how can you keep it this way if inflation's, going to come up? If you turn the page, look at outside, the US economy recovers, continue to diverge across countries, depending on the success of the vaccine. And I think it's really interesting, if you look at that chart, look at China, meaning that they've actually recovered through the projected GDP per capita reach pre-pandemic levels. So they're actually doing well. US is doing well, but then go look at South Africa and Argentina.
I have a question. Sorry, what the hell happened in Argentina?
They got hit hard with the pandemic.
They got hit hard. You're looking at, look at Europe, look at France and the United Kingdom. So what had happened? Well, Argentina's not, it's got a lot of third world, dynamics to it. So you're gonna see that when you look at your international, your global returns, that they've had a harder problem. Like South Africa, we would expect that would be very hard to come back. There's a lot of poverty there as well. So you've got poverty. How are you gonna get the vaccines? How are you gonna take care of the people who are sick? So that's an issue. I think more interesting is go look at the UK, how long UK and France are going to take to come back compared to, everything else. And interesting, China's come back so fast, but, let's look at what's been going on with China is that, Amazon, everything that they produce in China is really, they have been able to come back a lot faster. And also they've got such a large population that, this sounds, the percentage of who died from the pandemic compared to their population is a lot different than when we look at it in Europe and everything.
Another additional question, correct me if I'm wrong, the US, we're at, I think I saw at least in the past week, we're at pre-pandemic GDP right now, right? Like we've officially recovered
Right.
relative to where we started. Is that accurate?
And then let's look at global equities rallied. You can see, now this is really interesting on page 5. If you go and look at the trailing 12 months, look at that. We did 8.2 for the second quarter in US equities, but for the trailing 12 months, it's done 44.2% in US equities. And that is why, last year you saw that when you went down, in value, we saw the market go down. We took you right back to your allocation, the asset allocation. We actually did it a little bit slowly in the first wave, but we were doing that about once every 2 weeks. And that has really helped you. Whereas, a lot of people would want to panic and say, I'm out or done, or let's put it on the sidelines and everything. But you would never guess that 12 months later, we'd be sitting there with a 44% return in the US equities. One of the things that has helped you is the high yield bonds. Look, for the year, they've done 15.4, for the quarter, 2.7. And then we go look at US bonds. We really know that fixed income has been struggling. Year to date, they're actually in negative territory. And that's one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about, the diversification that we've done the education about, and making a little bit of changes because we know fixed income is really not going to give you that return. Emerging markets are at 40.9, and look at commodities have also come back for the quarter at 13.3. We turn the page, we look at US equity markets continued their strength. In the second quarter, all sectors finished the quarter in black, except utilities, with more cyclical areas generally outperforming their more defensive counterparts. Energy was up 12.7, REITs were up 12%, led the way again, while utilities were down negative 0.4 and consumer staples were up 3.6, but they lagged. And you can see that for the quarter, and you can look at utilities were down. REITs are interesting. We'll talk a little bit about real estate there. We know that a real estate, for the individual consumer has really gone up. You've probably seen it in your county, we're seeing it in our county. It was just with some clients, they've been seeing it. But real estate, when we look at the institutional real estate, that's actually struggled because one of the things that we know is all those business buildings. Not only did everybody leave, and work from home, now these corporations are saying, well, look, we don't need 6 floors, we only need 2 floors. So that is really, long-term, we still feel like it's a really good investment. It's going to do a little bit more diversification for your fixed income. But that's probably had a little bit of a bump. We do that in the last 12 to 18 months. And then you turn over and we look at fixed income. As I said, interest rates fell for intermediate and long-term treasuries in second quarter. Most market participants attribute to the drop to technical factors. And then we look at some investment grade debt, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That was that high yield that we put you in last year. We did it a very short term, meaning 1, 2, 3 years. It was a nice play. We trimmed it back, but we were able to get a little bit of some return from there. And you look at the high yield spread. So look below on page 7, you see where it spiked in January of 08, so in the 08 prices. And then you can see where it started to spike. We saw that in March of last year. So we took advantage of that, and then it's going down a little bit. So we got a little bit out of it, but it's still been a nice return for the portfolio. Are there any questions? All right, let's talk a little bit about how you've done. So if you turn to the next exhibit, you can see the market value of June 30th, I'm happy to say is 100 million.
Let's pause for a second there. Let's pause. That's the first time that the value's ever hit that. Dave, you missed it by, I think, 2 days.
Not really. This is June 30th.
Oh, look at you.
Thank you for trying to bring that up, but
You were prepared. You knew exactly where I was going. You knew exactly.
the seats here are a little different, but I do have to point that out. June 30th, I was still in the house. But thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Good job to the previous board. I think, this board's done well. I'm thanking Marquette, in providing. We've officially recovered from Frank McCary's retirement. I think that's excellent.
Jan's is coming.
Oh, back to Amy.
So, for the second quarter, the plan returned 5.7, had a net investment gain of 5.4. Year to date, you had a return of 9.2% through the end of June, with a net investment gain of 8.4 million. For the trailing 3 years, you annualized 11.5 with a net investment gain of 28 million. Since inception, since Marquette's come in, you've had an annualized return of 9% with a net investment gain of 49.5 million. So we've almost doubled it for you. And that's a lot of working with the board, deciding to do that, and a little bit to do with us.
Do we know, and I know this might not be directly through Marquette, it might be more through the actuaries. Do we know at what percent we're funded? I know we're close to 100, if we're above or below.
I think it's over.
You're probably over, I think,
I think it's 101.
So that's another thing to add.
At the end of the year, I think it was 101. Again, the end of the year that I was still around.
Yeah, that's not,
Let's clarify that, right? Dave G was still in attendance.
Actually, it was Dave G and Dave P. It was the same team, just a
The
different
Dave.
head now.
it was the tag team.
That's
I think it's
yeah.
101, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound right, Dave?
I know it was above 100.
It's a little bit above, I think it was 101 point something.
So we'll say 101, but that's just something else that, I want to reemphasize at this meeting, and every meeting, is that our county pension fund, unlike I think a lot of government pension funds across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is fully funded, and we're in good shape moving forward. I do want to emphasize that.
But that had nothing to do with me retiring. I say that publicly.
We should have brought pom-poms. I think I have some fireworks in my office.
Okay.
And, a lot of that has been the diversification, this board, previous board members who've worked hard at and you've had some market growth, but remember, within that time frame, we've also had some down market. So it's been, we've got through it, and what we really look at is that inception. You have annualized at 9%. That's most important. You're meeting your actuarial assumption. You know, you look at these plans and, it's your kind of 5 to 10 year return, what you're annualizing, and that's really the most important. I mean, you're gonna have quarters where everybody outperforms the benchmark, you're gonna have quarters where they don't outperform the benchmark, you're gonna have years where you're negative, but it's really that long term, that's when you look at things like that. So, equity composite returned 7.4 for the second quarter, year to date was up through 1 year was 39. US equities are 7.7, global was 7.8, international, as I said, international had a little bit of a tougher time. They still returned 5.3.
Argentina.
But, and then we witnessed a style and market cap shift in the second quarter. Growth stocks outperformed value oriented and large cap stocks outperformed small cap stocks. And, you know, we go back and forth on this growth, you know, value comes into play, then growth starts going. And a lot of times we'll see value stocks do much better in, when the market's more volatile. Last April, May, we didn't see that because the market went down and then every manager was out there trying to find something, growth stocks, because they wanted to see if they could get back what they had lost, so to speak. And we know that the 5 stocks that moved the market last year, you know, Alphabet, which is Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and Apple, they were the ones that made that whole move. So if you held them in March, you would have gone down 60%. If you held them in April and only those 5 stocks, then you would have gone back up. So it was really hard for the managers. Like S&P had 5 stocks that were basically moving S&P 500, so those 495 stocks were kind of like this. So we've actually seen some of the volatility come out of the market. We look at the US fixed income composite returned 1.9 for the second quarter, while up 0.4 on a 1 year period. So that being said, we'll talk a little bit about some of this asset allocation. High yield manager Lord Abbett continued strong performance, returned 3% for the second quarter, and for the 1 year period did 19%. So that was really worth going into. You know, we've taken a little bit off. And then looking ahead and some of the things that we've done, we put in a full redemption for the JP Morgan Strategic Property Fund with proceeds moving to the Clarion Line Properties Fund. That being said, we did that on 2 reasons. One is we looked at cost. We also looked at being able to get in and out. And JP Morgan, we were a little bit concerned with performance. So, you know, that's one of the nice things on having a discretionary account is that we look at those, we say, no, not really happy there. We're going to pull you out and put you in there, even though it's a long-term investment. We liked JPM Mortgage Strategic Property Fund, but then when we looked at the underlying on what they had in their portfolio, and we also looked at the cost and we had some changes on managers, we just liked Clarion Line Properties a lot more. And just so you know, they have to go through a vetting. They have anybody to be put in this account. We do an 18-month vetting, on-site visits theirs, on-site visit our office, and then we go through, they have to go through all the vetting through research, and they have to meet with us. We meet with all the money managers. So, and a lot of our clients are in Clarion. It's not like we just go and pick somebody. So they had already been vetted, they had already been used in a lot of accounts. We just thought it was a better fit for Lawrence County. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the asset allocation changes, but I want to talk about your managers real quick. We're looking at, we've done defensive equity, global infrastructure, putting that in. They've got an IPS addendum, but I just want to go through it with you one more time before we do that so that we're all comfortable with that. So let's just jump very quickly to page find. No, let's jump to page 7. Sorry, in a little bit of a different spot. And I do want to say that for everything that you're invested in, your estimated annual fee, we've really, really cut that back down. You're only at 34 basis points. So all in, that's pretty good on there. So let's go look at American Funds Washington Mutual did very well for the quarter. They did 6.4 versus 5.0. Eaton Vance did SMID 5.3%. We look at AB Global Core Equity did 8% for the quarter, and they also did 15.2. We look at MFS did 7% for the quarter. Non-US equities, what we did was you've got the Fidelity Total International Index, and we put you in the Fidelity Emerging Market Index in February of this year. One of the reasons why we did that is we realized with non-US equities, international managers, it's really hard to find an international manager that's going to do really, really well to get you all that exposure. So you do have one active manager, which is Hartford Schroders, which you can see had a really good year to date. They did 14% versus 11.7. But we thought, when you look at, you also have to look at cost when you look at managers. So sometimes it makes sense to put an index. So we wrapped an active manager and then we wrapped those two indexes around. If we go and find an emerging manager that we really, really like, we may put them in there and take that index out. But right now we've done this with all of our OCIO clients. And then real estate, you can see JP Morgan and you can see Clarion. Clarion did 5.3, whereas JP Morgan did for the 3 months 2.7. And then for year to date, Clarion did 7.4, JP Morgan did 4.3, your policy. And I think this is really interesting to look at. Year to date, real estate's done 6.4. Year to date, you can see below your fixed income composite's done a negative 1.6. So it did make sense to put that diversification in there. It's not double digits, but it's nice and steady. And we know that if real estate does between 4 and 6, 7% annualized year over year, that's going to up and help keep the returns up. And then we look at Lord Abbett did 3%. Year to date, 4.9, your high yield. And then, as I said, for the trailing 12 months, it did 19%. So that was a really good buy in March of 2020. They're eventually going to go away. So we see high yield kind of go out of favor and the yield shift will just slowly chop away at them. Are there any questions on?
Just a comment. I'm really glad you went with Eaton Vance. And you didn't take my advice. I suggested Eaton Breakfast, but they went with Eaton Vance, so you did the right thing.
Why did I know that I was?
And I was late.
I was late.
And I was thinking, I don't ever remember you recommending something.
I know, I was sitting there thinking,
Who got me over? Because I think we're
Line was 20 minutes in, we're 30 minutes in.
Right, so let's look at the performance.
Let's do that, yes.
Let's look at
Let's do that.
oh, that's why I switched.
All right, so here's your performance as of July, and I will talk about this a little bit. 1 month for July, you did 1.1 versus the total fund policy of 0.9, and year to date, you're up 10%, 10.3%. Versus the policy index of 9.9, and you finished the end of July at 100 million, 0.8. So 891. So actually, that should probably be up. You're probably about 101 right now. So that's really good. If the market does nothing till the end of the year, we would be really, really happy. So looking forward, there are some things on the horizon. We do know you've got some international worries. I mean, the Middle East is becoming an issue. We know that there's a pandemic. Will they go back to shutdowns? Probably not, but probably go more to masks, at least through the end of this year. But that's always something that we look at. We look at what's happened with the car dealers. They've got all these cars sitting with not getting the chips in. So, once that comes, we expect to see auto sales go up, in the first quarter of next year. So, we're hoping it's gonna be some interest in what happens with the infrastructure bill passing. We look at what's gonna happen with everybody getting back to work. We also know that the extra unemployment checks are gonna stop. There's no more stimulus packages right now on the table. So, it's kind of sit back and look. As long as inflation, in one way, we like inflation to stay a little bit lower, but meaning inflation, once it gets up, it means that we're spending more, the consumers out there. All right, so I gave you these two pieces right here. Okay, so what we're looking at doing is we've talked about a lot about diversification. And when we originally started this plan, so let's just look at these both. We want to make sure that you're long-term. And we also want to look at the kind of volatility that you currently have. And actually, when we add something like defensive equity and global, you're actually, on this page, you're actually taking down your volatility. So go look at your current. Your average annualized 10-year return is saying if the markets do historically and what we're projecting with where we see the fixed income, you're going to have a return of 6.5%. If we make some of those changes, you're going to have a return of 6.58 in a single house, really not that much difference. But look at your average annualized 10-year return. We're taking it from 11.93% to 11.30. So we're actually lowering volatility, getting a tiny little bit more of a return. And that is by doing, we'll make a little bit of change on your fixed income. We'll take that down to 23%. Your all cap core, we're going to take down to 42%. We're going to keep your current broad non-US equity. Then we're going to add 5% into defensive equity, 5% into global, and we're going to take 2.5% out of real estate and fund that global and defensive equity a little bit. So we're just going to make some asset allocation changes. The reason why I brought that to you is we can make all the manager changes we want. Your asset allocation is actually yours to decide as a board if you're comfortable with that. If you were comfortable with that, you can take this page and you can look at what the before portfolio would eventually look like. And we're trying to put you in more of a line. I know when we first came out and started to work with you and you and you, that we had something what we called a C conservative portfolio, and then we have a moderate portfolio. We really started to move all of our C portfolios into our moderate. So that's what we're starting to look at like this. And it's really because it's an ever-changing market out there. We know the more asset classes that you put in actually lower your volatility, diversify, the better off down the road you're going to be. So that being said, that's how this portfolio would look. We would do some sales and make some changes on there. Now, Clarion is now at 5.2%. We've got a target at 10, so we would buy more into Clarion in there. And then, we'll make those changes, and then we are able to fund global infrastructure. We've got in line on a placement, but we'll probably put you into a global infrastructure manager that we can just go into an ETF right now, and then we'll move you over to your private placement when they do the call. Are there any questions?
Don't say a word.
Oh, I was just getting ready to.
I know.
What do you got? I'm just glad they decided not to trim the hedge funds.
I have a lot of paper clips over here. I'm gonna start shooting your way.
I'm gonna have to start thinking of some comebacks.
You
can't.
can't. He picks them
I
out.
know, I can't.
He has that knack, he just does it and.
But you saw it coming, didn't you?
Oh, you gotta look on, you gotta look. You gotta look. I'm sorry. Little twitch in the eye.
My apologies. And to the board, my apologies.
It's nice to know that we're sitting in a position that is so secure at this point in time that there can be a bit of levity that
Plus it proves I'm paying attention.
is. Yeah, I saw the smell and thought, I lost track of where we were at here. Did he lose track as well? No, he was getting ready.
It always does feel good when the market's up. too,
Yeah,
you know,
yes,
We've done really well.
yes.
And there's times where the market's down. I know I've come in, when the market's been down, but it's just, it is what it is. And to know that the long term, I think you're in a good position. So I did send Dave the addendum, if you are comfortable in doing those changes and our recommendations. But then remember, the asset allocation's yours, so if you don't wanna do it, that's fine too, we'll work around that as well.
Yes, it raises a question, a very serious question, but do you wish for us to take a formal vote to that effect? So that it's on the record that we've done that?
To adopt the new addendum of,
Okay. Well, that's, first of all, is the board amenable, doing that vote? Is there a motion? Well, first we need a resolution here, I guess. Vanessa, if you'd be so kind as to after the meeting, do we want to type up resolution 2021 dash whatever?
Right.
I have the number, I know.
What- do we know what-
003. I believe.
003,
Okay.
now therefore be resolved by Lawrence County Pension Board, that the asset allocation, as detailed on, we'll designate this as attachment A for asset allocation,
Okay.
is accepted and the investment advisor, is, authorized, to enact the allocation as attached, something to that effect.
the addendum.
Oh, the addendum.
Yes, that's all, that's right. Here,
Oh,
you
yeah,
just need to sign that, but another copy, so you can keep on it, and keep that one.
Can you pass that down?
You're asking for a motion to that effect, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, we'll do. Where this is full. All right, yeah, we'll consider this to the resolution attachment A, and yeah,
Approve the addendum.
to approve, well,
Is that what it's supposed to
Yeah.
be, the addendum?
Now it's
To approve the addendum as presented.
now therefore be resolved by Lawrence County, Lawrence County Pension Board, that the addendum as attached, is approved.
I'll make that.
I'll second.
The motion is second, is there any further discussion? Hearing none, Vanessa, please call the roll.
Acting Controller Prestafine,
Yes.
Treasurer Rapone,
Yes.
Commissioner Steelvogel,
Yes.
Commissioner Vogler,
Yes,
Commissioner Boyd.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. I will note that in the future, the sunshine law, as we mentioned in our commissioners meeting, has changed. And so to that end, it's, the program must be coming from the controller's office. But if we need to do something like this in the future, we need to have a resolution written up on the agenda, so that we're able to take action on it. If we don't have one on the agenda, we won't be able to take action, and that's based on salary law, or based on a sunshine law change.
And so I'll remember that, so was it like 2-week notice or?
It's 48 hours, we have to have it
Okay, all right,
posted.
I'll just do that, that's, okay.
When does that take effect?
End of the month.
Okay, so we're okay to.
We're good today. We're good today.
Today,
Yes,
and our
we're
next
good.
quarterly meeting, if there's anything,
Right, so we'll
right,
Morgan, can I have that attachment?
and here's another one right here.
Oh,
There you
So
are.
you can sign it?
We'll sign, okay.
Sign it.
do we need to change the date where it says adopted to, is it the 10th
Yes,
to the 17th?
yes. I get McCary's attention here.
And actually, we'll probably implement this in September.
thank you.
And I just sent it by and I didn't sign it.
Oh, Morgan, you needed to sign there.
Son of a bitch.
Where's the other one?
You want this
We
one?
got the other one.
Okay, start over.
I just saw
Is
that
that
trade.
trade? Okay, there we are. So that'll be you.
Gotcha.
I'll give you right now.
So I don't mess that up again. There's that.
pass this along. Great.
Anything else?
Okay, so are there any questions about the quarterly meeting, about the Fairmont Fourth Market, or?
I think we're in pretty good shape. I'm very happy with the fund right now.
Absolutely correct.
You're very
Thank you.
content. If you couldn't tell by the second half of that, me tapping away on the phone, I have full faith and confidence in you guys and everything we've done, so we very much appreciate everything. The next meeting will be November 16th, 2021. We'll get an update as to the third quarter of 21. Anything additional for any of my colleagues, new business, anything that you wish to be brought up? We're trying to get Frank in here, let him know we recovered from his retirement. We got Rich.
Okay, first of all, I want to officially welcome Dave as our acting controller to our retirement board. It's wonderful to have you, Dave, and your expertise that we welcome. And I was just thinking, wow, you and me were the original pension board. It's right, you're the official. And I came in 2008. Speaking of that, 2008, remember that year, how that was. And
a bad year.
everything we've been through, up and down, and everything in between, to sit here to say we broke 100 million through all of that. You know, I just think that what we all do is so serious because, you know, we're stewards for the past, the present, and the future. So everything we do, we're very serious about it. Thank you for your leadership, Marquette, and to my colleagues. Congratulations on these numbers. This is wonderful. So thank you.
Frank, I just want to let you know the pension fund broke $100 million, which means we've officially recovered from your
Yes.
retirement.
Well, good, now you got Jan Calhoun.
That's what we said.
There you go.
Yes,
That's
Right?
Janet,
You gotta do it now.
it.
Did you raise my pension, Donnie? Did you raise it?
We did not. We did not,
We
Frank.
cannot afford that right now.
Yes, you
Yeah.
did.
No.
Frank, you have more money than gone.
Thank God.
They're gone. Anyway, any additional comments from the board? Good. Dave, welcome to the party. Dave Preston, welcome to the party. We're happy to have you with us, and hopefully we'll have you for many years to come.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm certainly gonna be, it was good to see you out at the fair yesterday working. But on that note, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, question on the motion, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign, motion carries. Lawrence County Pension Board is adjourned.
Mr. Boyd is gonna turn off the.
Hey, Dave,
Yes, I am. There we go.
I don't know. How are you doing that?
Warren, how are you?
Frank, you doing?
Pretty much the first day, so.
Really? Did you get signed?
How's your golf?
I'm a member of the.
I wouldn't call it golf.